So that's sort of interesting that it disrupted this normal weight regulation. So the question is, how does the fructose actually do this? And it turns out that it's an energy balance thing. It's an energy problem. And it relates to the mitochondria, just as you heard earlier. The mitochondria are the main little organelles in our cells that make energy. Now, normally, when we eat food or calories, that energy is used to make ATP. ATP is what the mitochondria make. The mitochondria churn out this ATP. It's the energy that we use to do everything. And in the cells, when you eat a nutrient, they try to maintain the energy levels high. The ATP levels are high. And if there's any extra food, any extra energy that comes in, once the ATP levels are full, then that gets stored as fat. Okay, and so that's how it works. When you eat, normally, if you're in balance and you have good energy, your mitochondria are working beautifully. They produce the ATP. You keep the ATP high, and that's how it works. Fructose is the only nutrient that does a trick. And the trick it does is it stuns the mitochondria. It's an actual mitochondrial poison. We actually identified the mechanism. And what it does is it suppresses the mitochondria so that they make less ATP. And so they don't actually fill the whole tank. The ATP levels are kept at a low level, about anywhere from 10 to 30% lower than normal. And when that happens, at the same time, it blocks the conversion of fat to ATP. It blocks what we call fatty acid oxidation. And so it blocks the ability to break the fat down to make the ATP. So the ATP levels stay low. When you eat, the energy gets shunted. It's an energy balance equation. The energy gets shunted to the fat, which is a stored energy, and not to the active energy. It's a brilliant system. And eventually you cap up, the ATP levels come up, but when it's done, you've eaten a lot more food than you should for trying to stay in balance. And so you end up accumulating fat. It's brilliant. So the biochemistry of it, I'm just going to show this one slide. It's all driven by an enzyme called KHK, fructokinase. The hell of a killer enzyme. This KHK enzyme metabolizes fructose. It's the first enzyme in that pathway. And from that, you generate energy and all the things like all nutrients do. But there's a side chain. There's a side reaction that occurs when this happens. And that is that KHK burns some ATP to make energy. So all foods require some energy to be consumed to make energy, but this one's like an unregulated train. It's like a runaway train. It just absolutely drops that ATP level rapidly. So there's a fall in ATP, and that accumulates this substance called AMP, and then that activates an enzyme that removes the AMP. Now, AMP is normally used to replenish the ATP. So we're removing the ability to remake the ATP. And at the same time, it generates a substance called uric acid, which is the cause of gout. But when it goes up inside the cell, it's the mitochondrial poison. And it basically activates the system that suppresses the mitochondria, blocks the ATP production, as well as the ability to recover ATP. So you have a low ATP state. So there's actually 5 steps in this process. It's amazing. It just keeps the ATP level down. And everyone with obesity and diabetes, the vast majority of people who have obesity, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, fatty liver, all these diseases have low ATP levels. As far as I'm aware, this is the only nutrient that lowers ATP. Alcohol does too, actually. So when we studied this, we found that it activated a whole syndrome, a syndrome that included foraging, hunger, thirst. It stimulates the accumulation of fat and glycogen and eating increased amounts of food. It induces insulin resistance and systemic inflammation and even raises blood pressure. And it's all to help you survive. This was all meant to be a good thing. The insulin resistance that it induces leads to less glucose being used in the muscle, which is an advantage because it provides more glucose for the brain. And some areas of the brain do not require insulin, not all, but some areas do not require insulin, and so it helps maintain glucose levels to the brain. It reduces the amount of energy that's expended in the muscle, so it reduces energy metabolism. So it reduces resting energy, but the foraging, when you're foraging, it actually does not reduce that. So you can walk and run and look for the food, but when you're not doing that, you're going to rest very well. You're going to just kind of like be like a couch potato. And in fact, when we give fructose to our mice and we use laser lights, when they're hungry, when the food comes, they're just running all over for it. But when they're not, when there's no food there, they just kind of lay there and they're actually very still. So all of these things, inflammation and all these things are meant to be a good thing. They're meant to help the animals survive.